this evening together. We're going to continue this sermon series, The Blueprint, as we follow God's framework. And as you know, we are narrowing our focus to a specific role and responsibility, the roles that church members share to the elders of a local church. This morning, we talked about two of those responsibilities. This evening, we're going to conclude with two more. So by the end of this lesson, you will have four responsibilities that we as church members have to our elders in the local church. A congregation is only as great as the example of its elders. It's very unlikely that a congregation would ever rise above its leaders. A congregation can be crippled by bad leadership, whereas another congregation could climb to new heights because of good leadership. And it is the case that oftentimes it is the leaders of the congregation, the elders, that Satan attacks first. As the congregation's leaders, the elders are the first line of defense to the sheep or the members. The greatest leader that ever lived was named Jesus, and he was no stranger to attacks from Satan. In fact, if you were to look at the temptation of Jesus Christ as recorded in Matthew 4 and Luke chapter 4, perhaps we could learn some lessons about how elders or leaders in the local congregation are tempted today. If you were to go to Matthew chapter 3, 16 and 17, you would find the first. Satan attacks spiritual leaders after spiritual endeavors. In Matthew 3, 16 and 17, we find the baptism of Jesus, wherein he is immersed by John the Baptizer. And Jesus says this was done not because he had any sin that he needed to wash away, but rather because he was doing this to fulfill all righteousness. But it was after this spiritual endeavor that Jesus went from a great spiritual height to a great spiritual low, when he's tempted in the wilderness by Satan after 40 days and 40 nights of fasting. He went from a high to a low, and it's oftentimes that way in a local congregation. Congregations will go from spiritual highs to spiritual lows. You ever wonder why a congregation that is growing or experiencing a season of growth, the common saying is this, that when we grow in problems. Why is that the case? Because as a congregation grows, you add new members to that congregation, and oftentimes Satan tries to attack a growing congregation because the last thing that he wants to see is a congregation of the Lord's church growing in a variety of different ways. And it brings more problems into the congregation. Beware of spiritual highs because they will always be followed of spiritual lows. And we love the spiritual highs, but oftentimes it's sometimes difficult to navigate the spiritual lows. Satan attacks spiritual leaders when they're physically vulnerable. So Jesus is about to go into the desert to be tempted, but before he does, he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. I would argue that he was at his physically weakest moment, but spiritually he was very strong as we studied fasting and what it means for us from a spiritual basis. Satan didn't attack Jesus when he was strongest. He attacked Jesus in ways in which he was the weakest. And it's oftentimes the case when an elder is going through a physical infirmity or an elder is dealing with something physical, whether personally or in his family, that Satan will try to find a way into the heart of that elder to tempt him. Maybe he loses a family member. Maybe he loses a child, or maybe he loses his wife. And he might start asking the questions like, why does this happen to me? I mean, I am an elder in the Lord's church. I do a good work. They start to question. Satan is using those vulnerable moments to attack a person. What about this one? Satan attacks spiritual leaders when they are alone. Satan didn't attack Jesus when he was surrounded by those who made him strong. Satan attacked Jesus when it was just Jesus and him in the wilderness, when they were alone together. If you've ever served as a preacher, as a minister, if you've ever served as an elder, you know there will be moments in time in which you will feel alone. And it's those moments in time when you are alone or feel alone that you are your most vulnerable. And what about this one? Satan attacks spiritual leaders and always returns. So we know that Jesus goes toe-to-toe with Satan in the wilderness. He survives the 3 temptations that are laid at his feet as recorded in the Scriptures. But Luke chapter 4, verse 13 records for us that Satan didn't just at that moment of time tempt Jesus 3 times and say, I can't defeat him. There's no use of tempting him anymore. In fact, it says that he departed from him only to return at an opportune time. You're not just going to be tempted once, twice, or 3 times. You might overcome a temptation today, but tomorrow Satan might bring a temptation that is stronger than the temptation that you face today. So Satan tempts us, yes. And we might overcome that temptation, but Satan will always return. It is the case that leaders in a local congregation, such as the elders, are oftentimes those who are most attacked by Satan. Maybe that is a personal attack. Maybe that could come through their family. How many congregations have been upended because the family member of an elder has gone into a wayward lifestyle? That elder decided that they were going to make concessions based upon biblical principles, and they've changed the way that they teach, they've changed the way that they believe. And what happens is a man is turned on reason, but the man only turns on reason when reason turns on him. Satan is constantly trying to attack our elders in a variety of different ways, through a variety of different avenues, to deflate them. Because a discouraged eldership oftentimes means a disconnected eldership. And a discouraged and a disconnected eldership means a vulnerable congregation, because Satan is trying to get to you. But in order for him to get to you, he's got to get through that first line of defense, which is the eldership. And while Satan is trying to deflate the elders, it is our job as New Testament Christians to inflate the elders. If there is something said discouraging about the eldership, we ought to meet it with something that is encouraging. Every one word of discouragement ought to be met with 10 words of encouragement. We want a congregation that has a strong eldership. For a congregation to have a strong eldership, it means that we must have an encouraged eldership. It means that we must have an effective eldership. It means that we must play our role as members when it comes to our elders. So tonight, let's finish these 2 responsibilities, bringing our list to 4 responsibilities that we have as church members to the elders of the local church. And the first is found in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 12. And we urge you, brethren, to recognize those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you. Responsibility number 3. We are to know our elders. The word know that is employed here by the Apostle Paul means to regard highly, or it also implies that we are acquainted with them. We are to know our elders. So if it's important for us to know our elders or to become acquainted with them, perhaps the question that we should ask is this: how can we become acquainted with or more acquainted with our eldership? I want to give you 7 ways that we should know our elders. Number 1, we should know our elders by their face. So you have a visiting person who comes into a congregation, maybe on a Sunday, maybe on a Wednesday. You go over as a Christian to introduce to yourself that person, because that's the Christian thing to do. And as you introduce yourself to that person, maybe you point out in the auditorium, over there is one of our elders, and over there is another one of our elders, and coming towards you is another one of our elders. And if you ever have any questions about the things that we teach or the things that we practice in this congregation, please do not hesitate to ask me or ask one of our elders. Can you point out your elders by face? Number 2, we should know our elders by their voice. You ever been in a place, maybe a restaurant, maybe a store? You hear a voice that you recognize, and even though you can't see the person, you know whose voice that is. That's how it should be with our elders. We should know their voice. But implied within that is we speak with them and they speak with us to a point where we understand and we know the voice of our elders. Maybe it's in a one-on-one conversation, yes, but it could also be because they are before the pulpit and in the Bible classes, teaching and preaching and proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, leading the sheep in the proper direction so that they might reach the proper location, and that is heaven. And you know their voice. And maybe even when you're going through a difficult time in your life and you can remember an elder in past times at this congregation, somebody who meant the world to you and made an influence in your life, that as you're going through that difficult time in your life, maybe you remember a word of advice that they gave you before they passed. That's remembering their voice. That's knowing their voice. And for those of you who have known the elders of past in this congregation, that's a great comfort in moments of tribulation and temptation. What about this one? We should know them by their personality. What do they like? What don't they like? What kind of humor do they like? What kind of personality do they have? What gets under their skin? What do they enjoy? What are their hobbies? What do they do in their spare time? We should know them by their personality because it can help us to navigate the relationships that we have with our eldership. But what about this one? We should also know them by their core values. What do they hold near and dear in the Christian life? Do you realize that what our elders hold near and important to their hearts in the Christian life is going to be reflected in the congregation? So, for example, if you have an eldership who believe in a very family atmosphere, we want to make this atmosphere very inviting, very family-oriented. That's important to them. You know what the congregation's going to be? They're going to be family-oriented. I've been to a lot of congregations that are very cold. They're not very warm. And if you look to the elders, you know why that congregation more than likely is cold and not warm? It's because the elders are cold and they're not warm. And if the elders are cold and not warm, you know that congregation is going to follow their lead, and more than likely they're going to be cold. But if a congregation's warm, if a congregation's inviting, if a congregation is loving, that is oftentimes a reflection of the elders that oversee them. What's important to elders will be important to the congregation. But what about this one? We should know them by their works. It's very common practice in the Lord's church that if a congregation has elders, those elders will be assigned various spheres of influence or various works in the congregation. One elder might be over mission work. Another elder might be over worship. Another elder might be over finances and givings and contributions. So if I want to know how I can get involved in the worship service, I need to go to the elder that is over that. If I want to find out how I can get involved in mission work, I need to go to the elder that is involved in that. If I want to find out how I can leave a piece of property in my inheritance or a house or prepare for financial givings even after my passing, I need to go to the elder or the elders that have been assigned over that. There are various congregations that have elders that have different works. I need to know their works so that I can be acquainted with the congregation. What about this one? I should know them by their self-sacrifice. Do you agree that we should be so acquainted with the elders that we recognize and that we remember the sacrifice that they make in their lives to be an elder? So just as our atmosphere stops a meteor from coming into earth and destroying it, a danger that is barreling toward our planet, so also do elders oftentimes stop the threats and the dangers that are barreling toward our congregations. You realize there's a lot of things that never reach a certain level in a congregation because the eldership has the fortitude and the foresight to make sure those things are rooted out and they never become a problem in the congregation. In the words of Barney Fife, they nip it in the bud. They get it out of the way. So also is the case with good elders in a congregation. We should know them by their faithfulness. Day in, day out. Year in, year out. Decade in, decade out. We should know them by their faithfulness to the gospel that has been delivered to their heart. And we should know them by their unwavering spirit when it comes to the truth that is taught in the pages of the New Testament. How many elders have you known that you looked up to as an example for your life, because day in, day out, year in, year out, decade in, decade out, they remained faithful. They never changed. They were always the same. And you admired that. That's the ways that we should know our elders. But if it's important that we become acquainted with our elders, what are some ways that perhaps we could better establish an acquaintance? Well, here are 5 tips in growing in knowing your elders. Number 1, invite he and his family into your life. Recently, the eldership announced that they were going to start their visiting program. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to be able to invite the elders into your home. Maybe you could make them a meal. Maybe you go to an elder specifically and individually and invite he and his family into your house so that they can get to know you a little better, so that they can eat dinner with you. You realize that if they come to your home, they're going to see pictures on your wall. They'll see the people that are important to your life. They'll see the things in your house that are important to you, which will be a reflection of what is core valued in your life. It's one thing to shake the hand of an elder in the foyer, or to talk to an elder in the auditorium and say, "How are you doing today?" or for that elder to ask you, "How are you doing today?" It's another matter to be able to bring that elder into your home and to be able to share a meal with that elder. So when an employer interviews an employee, oftentimes what that employer will do is take that prospective employee out to dinner. Why is that the case? Well, because if they take them out to dinner, their guard is lowered, they show more of their personality, and you get to know more about that person. Well, maybe the solution would be, number 2, to share a meal with he and his family. It doesn't have to be in your home. Maybe it can be in a restaurant, but sharing a meal with them will help them to get to know you better and help you to get to know them better. Number 3, sit next to an elder at a fellowship meal. Pick up your plate next time we have a 5th Sunday meal, or next time that we have a fellowship meal. Pick up your plate and go sit next to he and his family and get to talk to them, have conversation with them, get to know them a little bit better. What about this one? Sit with an elder in worship service. Now, I know we get confined to our assigned pews in the auditorium, but how nice would it be if we decided to mix things up? We sat next to an elder and worshiped with that person. Number 5, invite an elder to visit with you. So you go to an elder and you say, "You know, I had this friend who I invited to come to worship service. They came last Sunday. I wanted to take them cookies and a card. Would you like to come and visit with me?" Some of the most cherished times that I have with our elders is when we've gone to visit people together and we've been in other people's homes together, because it really knocks out 2 birds with 1 stone. They're able to visit with that person, yes, but they're also able to visit with you. They're able to see how that person is doing, yes, but they also get an insight into how you are doing as well. So there's a variety of different ways that we can grow in our acquaintance with our elders. But if we need to know our elders, doesn't that mean by implication that our elders need to know me? Now, a lot of people get very distant in this conversation. They say, "I don't want my elders to know me. Why do they need to know me? They need to stay out of my business." Well, there's really a lot of reasons why they need to know you, but here's 6 reasons why elders need to know you. Number 1, they need to know your talents. They need to know what your strengths are and how they can envision you ingratiating yourself into the work of the church. What are you good at? Are you a good public speaker? Maybe this is a person who could be a Bible class teacher. Maybe this is a person who could fill in the pulpit. Maybe you're not comfortable with speaking in public, but maybe you're comfortable with working behind the scenes. Maybe you're good with technology. This would be a good person that we could incorporate within the media booth to kind of help slow or smooth things out in the media booth. There are a variety of different ways that you can get involved in the work of the church, and these are things that the elders need to know, and they know those things by being able to see your strengths. Number 2, they need to know your struggles. What have you struggled with in the past? What has burdened you? What is tempting and trying you? And the reason they need to know your struggles is so that they, as those who watch over your soul, can help you overcome those things and remain faithful. There's a lot of members of the Lord's church who get stuck in a rut. They refuse to seek out the help of others, and that includes the eldership. And what happens is they don't overcome the hump, but rather they get stuck behind the hump, and they do not remain faithful. They leave the church because they refuse to seek out the help of others. They need to know your mistakes. It doesn't mean that you have to tell them all the gory details, but this is something that I've struggled with in the past. Or, about 10 years ago, my wife and I, we went through this rut in our marriage, and this was the situation. They need to know those things so that when they ingratiate you into the work of the church, they don't put you in situations where it might cause you to stumble or where it might bring a greater level of temptation to your life. They need to know your attendance. Is this person periodical in their attendance? Are they consistently faithful in their attendance? What's their attendance look like? And they need to know your giving. Is this person generous? Is this person covetous? Is this person willing to give, or is this person begrudging in their giving? Do they spend their money on things of godly pursuits, or do they spend their money on selfish, sinful pursuits? What about this one? They need to know our study habits. Is all the religion that you can muster in this building at this moment of time for a couple of hours a week, or what are you like at home? Do you study the Bible? How often do you study? What's your prayer life like? Do you do family devotions? Do you have family Bible time? What's it look like at home when you're not in this building? All of these things will help an eldership come to know you better, but it would also help you as a member come to know the eldership better. But here, let's move on. Responsibility number 2, from 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 13. And to esteem them very highly in love, for their work's sake, be at peace among yourselves. Responsibility number 4, and the final responsibility. We are to esteem and love our elders. Now, I want you to underline that word esteem in your Bible because that's important. The word esteem literally means to value. Now, I don't know much about the Greek language, but what I do know and what I have read is this word is mentioned in what's called the intensive form. Now, the intensive form is the highest way of saying something. So when Paul says you are to esteem your elders, he says you are to esteem them as high as you can possibly esteem them. You are to value them as high as you can possibly value them. How many congregations of the Lord's church would be better? How many congregations would be able to reach the community more effectively? How many congregations would be closer to what you read in the pages of the New Testament if we esteemed our elders, if we valued our elders as high as we could value them? So you come to 1 Timothy chapter 5, 17 and 18, when Timothy is hearing from Paul, and Paul gives him some instructions about elders, and this is what he says. He says, let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor. It kind of sounds like Hebrews 13:7 and also Hebrews 13:17 when he says those who rule over you, but it's also mentioned in 1 Thessalonians 5, 12 and 13. Let those who rule over you be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine. For the Scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain, and the laborer is worthy of its wages. Sometimes in the Lord's church, what you find are paid elders. This is the biblical precedence or the biblical authority to do that. He says that elders are worthy of double honors. Now, let's be honest. Many of us in this room have never served as elders. And many of us in this room have never had family members who were elders. So it means that it's very easy for us in this room not to be acquainted with the sacrifices and the responsibilities that are laid on the shoulder of the worthy man called an elder. And sometimes we might ask the question, well, what in an elder is worthy of esteem? Well, I know a couple of things. Number one, they accepted the responsibility. There are many members of the Lord's church, many men who have been approached in times past about being elders in the Lord's church, and they declined the opportunity. And if you ask them why they declined the opportunity, oftentimes it goes straight to this answer. Well, that's just a lot of responsibility, and I don't know if I'm ready to take on that responsibility. But there's also been many men in the Lord's church who have been approached about being elders that have taken on the responsibility, which means by implication that they were willing to take on added responsibility in their lives on top of the responsibilities they already had as Christians, to take on the responsibility of watching for your soul and giving an account for your soul. That deserves respect. Number two, they invested the hours. So you take all the elderships who meet either with other elders, with ministers, preachers, with other members. You add up all the hours in the year that elders spend shepherding, ministering to the sheep. Our elders meet on the first and third Sunday of every month. Oftentimes those meetings last anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. Say it lasts 2 hours. That's 4 hours a month where they are just meeting with themselves. If you multiply that by 12, now I'm not a math person, but if you multiply that by 12, and you can correct me if I'm wrong so I don't preach false doctrine, it's 48. That's 48 hours a year that they've already added to their schedule. You take in the other hours that they spend, maybe going to members' houses, maybe spending time with those members to see how they're doing, maybe sitting down one-on-one with members who are having struggles in their family or struggles in their marriages or struggles with their kids, and the hours continue to pile on and on and on. Now imagine taking 48 hours onto your already packed and busy schedule and adding that into your life. Worthy of respect. What about this one? They feel the stress. How many elders have lost sleep at night because they know a member is going through a struggle? They know a marriage is on the rocks. They know that they're probably going to have to withdraw from a member because they continue in a sinful lifestyle. They refuse to change. It's hurting the congregation. How many have lost sleep because of the responsibilities that have been placed on their shoulders? That's why they're worthy of esteem. Now, let's ask the question, how can we esteem our elders? Let's get a little bit more practical. 4 ways that we can express esteem to our elders. Number 1, we prioritize our gratitude for elders. How can an elder know that you're grateful for their service if you never let them know that you're thankful? Brandon and I the other day were talking about a girl that she had heard of who had taken her life, and her family decided to build a memorial scholarship in her death. And they said that after their daughter died, that they started to receive all these letters and all these notes in the mailboxes. And all these letters and notes were talking about how much their daughter meant to that person that was writing to them. One girl said that their daughter was the only person who smiled at me the entire year, my freshman year. Or their daughter was the only person who ever asked me how my day was going. And I asked Miranda the question, I said, how do you believe she would have felt if those people would have expressed that to her before she made the decision to take her life? Sometimes I'll go do gospel meetings, and it's very common that when we get home from the gospel meeting, we'll start getting letters. I remember one congregation that we went to do a gospel meeting at, we received 18 letters in the mail. You know where we put them? We put them in the table, or on the top of the table in our foyer. You know why we put it in our foyer on top of the table in a place of significance and importance? Because it meant the world to us. When's the last time that an elder walked out to his mailbox, opened it up, pulled out a letter that was written to you, or written from you to him and his family, just to express your thanks and your gratitude? We've got a gospel meeting coming up. Couldn't you write a letter to an elder and say, thank you so much for bringing that speaker. I listened to this topic on Tuesday evening. It really spoke to the situation that I'm in, and I'm thankful that you men procure speakers who bring these people into the congregation and bring this teaching and this inspiration for my life. What about this one? We pray for our elders. I love the tradition that this congregation has, which is not a tradition that every congregation has. It's very common that when the man comes before the congregation in this pulpit, stands behind this mic, and he prays in a public way, that he will pray for our elders. or he will pray for the preacher. I can't tell you how many times I've been prayed for from this pulpit, but every single time that I'm prayed for in this pulpit and I'm standing right there next to my wife and my son, it makes me feel like $1 million. Because it means that people care. When's the last time you were prayed for from the pulpit, and how did that make you feel? Made you feel great. I know it did. Because it means people care about your situation. I was talking to a person who came in to visit with us. We've had his wife on the prayer list for some time. And he said, I just want you to know that, I don't always get to come and visit, but sometimes I watch. And when I watch and you all mention my wife, it means the world to me. He's not even a member of the congregation, yet it means the world to him that we're praying for his wife. We pray for our elders. That's the best way that we can express gratitude. What about this one? We possess a cooperative attitude. I do what I'm asked to do. So Exodus 17, verse 12, you're familiar with this situation. Moses is on top of a mountain. The children of Israel are fighting a battle below. And you know how this goes. As long as Moses is able to hold up his arms, the children of Israel are victorious. Now he's got that rod in his arms, right? And when his arms get tired, what happened? They start to drop. So Aaron, his brother, sits him on a rock, and he holds up one of his arms. And then another man by the name of Hur comes up, and he holds up the other arm of Moses. What's the result? Victory. Now, I don't know why that's in the Bible. Maybe God was showing us the importance of teamwork. Maybe He was showing us the importance of working together and lifting up each other's burdens. I don't know why it's in the Bible, but I know it has a clear application in this lesson. That we ought to hold up the arms and the hands of our leaders. Think about it. When Moses' arms dropped, what happened? Lives were lost. When the elders' arms drop and their hands drop because they're tired, they're weary, they're discouraged, souls are at stake. The plan of work at a congregation is created by the elders. Ways to get involved in the congregation, the work of the congregation, is through the elders. So, for example, we have a great bus program going on. There's a lot of people that are able to come who are thankful for that bus program. If they come to you and they say, this is a good work, we need you to participate in it. Or the person who the elders have assigned over that work comes to you and says, this is a good work, we need you to participate. We need all the men that we could possibly get to participate in this bus program. And you say to them, I just got a lot of things going on right now in my life. I don't have time to make this bus program work. I'm doing other things in the church. Go ask somebody else. Listen to me. A person who cannot make time for the Lord's work in their life is a person that doesn't have enough Lord in their life. And how does that make the elders feel when they ask you to do something? You say, I just don't have time to do it. I don't want to do it. They feel discouraged. But what happens when they ask you to do something, you do it? They feel encouraged. Going back to our 3 reasons, they believe you can do it, they know it needs to get done, and because you're on the same page, you're going to do it because you want what's best for the congregation. And here's the last one. You have a peaceful attitude. Read this, verse 13, 1 Thessalonians 5. And esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake. Here it is. Be at peace among yourselves. It's the last sentence of this verse. Now, it's quite unusual. It's not unusual to find a command within the pages of the New Testament about being at peace with yourself. I mean, the Bible speaks often about being peaceful, right? Philippians chapter 4, 7 and 8. The peace which surpasses all understanding, guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. In the Sermon on the Mount, in the Beatitudes, Jesus says, be peacemakers. Enjoy, love, do peaceful things. It's found all throughout the New Testament. But the question is, why in this verse and this context? Paul put it in the same verse, in the same context, as talking about esteeming and loving your elders. Why? Because to be at peace with yourself is to help your elders. It's not being at peace with your elders. That's important, but it's not about being at peace with your elders, according to this verse. It's about being at peace with yourself. So if you have two members who don't get along, they're constantly butting heads, differences of personalities, differences of opinions, who's going to have to deal with that? The elders. So they're going to sit those two people down. They're going to talk with them. Who's going to get yelled at in that meeting? The elders. And then when they make a solution or a resolution in that situation, a judgment call, because remember, they don't have legislative authority, but they got executive authority and judicial authority. And when they make that judgment call in that situation, and one party doesn't like it, who are they going to get mad at? The elders. So if I'm at peace with myself, does that not mean that it will help the elders? And if I'm at peace with my brethren and I make a concerted effort to be long-suffering, patient, loving toward my brethren, who does that help? Well, it helps me, sure. And it certainly helps the congregation, but ultimately, it helps the elders. A few years ago on a vacation trip, Miranda and I were traveling, and on Sunday morning we went to Bible class and worship service at a congregation. And I went up to the preacher at that local congregation, who was a man who had retired. He had formerly been a professor. He had also been a president at a very prominent Christian university. And we started talking about the church, and we started talking about the work of the minister. And I don't even remember how elders got brought up, but elders got brought up. And the man made the statement to me. He said, "I cannot stand elders. All they do is hinder progress and guard the checkbook." Doesn't sound like my elders. Now, I know many men in many congregations who have had different experiences with elderships. But I know one thing. I'm thankful for mine. I am. I'm not just saying that, I am. I am thankful for my elders. And we should be thankful for elders. Isn't it the wisdom of God that God would prescribe such a method of shepherding and leading in the local church, a governance that would allow the congregation to thrive, but also to remain faithful? When you look at the elders, you look at the wisdom of God. And God says, I want you to treat these men with great respect. So, we should know our elders, yes. We should also esteem them, and we should love them. That's our responsibility and duty. Now, I want to extend the Lord's invitation to anyone in this auditorium tonight who's yet to obey the gospel. Maybe you have a spiritual need in your life. Maybe you're struggling right now spiritually. You've got some sin in your life that you need to take care of and you need to deal with. Maybe you just need the prayers of the congregation. You need God's people to wrap their arms around you and tell you that we're praying for you and we love you and we want you to overcome this struggle, this trial, this temptation in your life. Invitation's a wonderful opportunity to do that, but if you're here and you're not a Christian, we beg you, we implore you to please respond to the invitation to become a child of God tonight. Let today be your day of salvation. Come to meet your Lord tonight and be able to call Him Jesus, my Lord, and let Him be ruler to reign over your life all the days of your life.